Hey everybody, welcome to the Conversations in Groove podcast. I'm Benji Johnson and I'm going to be your host. You might ask yourself, what are Conversations in Groove? Heck, I don't know, but we're going to find out the whole season what they are. We're going to find out what your groove is and what some of my really cool friends' grooves are. Is it music? Is it TV and film? Do they act? Or do they just listen to records with a deep groove to them? Well, we're going to find out all season long. I got some really cool people coming up and some really big episodes coming up. So prepare yourself for the Conversations in Groove podcast right here live from Earthtones Recording Studio. All right, so welcome to episode 4, season 1, episode 4 of the Conversations in Groove podcast. And today, my guest is my good friend and ultra uber cool producer, Fanatic.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, man. We've been talking about this for a minute, and it's good to see it all coming to fruition, man. You got like a real extensive setup here, so I'm glad to be a part of this. I didn't know you was going to go all the way in like this, but you did.
You thought I was going to be recording it on my phone.
Yeah. No, this is like a television studio here.
Oh, man. Well, it's cool. It's I figured I got the room. I got the room to do it. And,
Right.
and I, the audio end of it, is easy. I
Right.
could do a couple of mics. And I can do them like via Zoom and stuff like that. Right. So the having the cameras to do, to record bands doing their thing in here, I thought, man, if I could just kill two birds with one stone while I'm recording the audio version of it, because I would record the audio version like this anyway, same mics and everything like that, Nice. So anyway, so let's introduce the fine people as to who you are and what you do.
Okay, let's do it.
And I always like to start with everybody at the beginning, like where I know people from, because I have people on here and people are like, man, how did you get this cat on? And I'm like, it's too long of a story to go into.
Right.
So this is where I'll try to shortly go into stories like that. So I know you because you're from Greensboro.
I am from the 6th borough, Greensboro, North Carolina. Went to Greensboro Day School and Smith High School, and just been here. And Greensboro is my foundation for where I learned and music and getting into music. Yeah,
and I heard of you like coming back to town, and man, I'm so disconnected from things because I'm in here all the time. Like I'm in here working on like the micro of records, and stuff like that. I don't know what's happening outside my front door half the time, man. So people were talking about you. I didn't know your track record because you were from here, but you weren't based out of here. So it's like, I was working with people from here and working in here all the time. So you grew up here. So then when I see your track record before I met you and I see your track record, I'm like, that's pretty impressive for a kid from Greensboro.
I have to pinch myself sometimes too. I'm like, yo, I'm from Greensboro. This doesn't really happen to people from Greensboro.
So if you guys don't know, I can run down 4 or 5 off the top of my head that always come up in conversations. Beyonce.
Yeah.
Lil Kim. Will Smith. Biggie.
Yes.
All right, that's 4. I don't know if I would even need to go any further with anyone else.
I mean, those are some iconic artists. Also Anthony Hamilton, Boyz II Men, Mace, Blackstreet, Michael Jackson.
Well, yeah. Don't let me forget that one.
So I've been very blessed in my career to work with, first of all, just to even be producing music at a time when so many icons were out at one time, because that's so rare today. So even to be out here, out there producing records during that time and to interact with those people was like an amazing, amazing thing, man.
I wouldn't have really thought about it like that. Think about how many. And the thing is, when you talk about like icon status now, it really has to go a certain amount of years before you go oh, well, this person wasn't just a flash in the pan. They weren't just a one-hit wonder or whatever. And talking about those people now.
Right.
It's a thing. And you're right. Look at how many people from that time, like just crammed into concentrated that. And you worked with the big ones. And that was what blew my mind is I think that, when you and I met the first time, I think you came in with JT. No.
I met you at, what you call it told me about you? Thomas. I met you with Thomas at GTCC.
Oh, okay.
We had a meeting over there. And I met you there.
So yeah. So we worked in here one day, and I knew we were going to get along. Not that I didn't think we were going to get along, but I knew we were going to get along. We were going to be lifetime friends because after working on a track that was very R&B and current radio sounding and had a lot of samples in it and things like that, after everybody left, you hung around and you said, the one question you asked me, and I thought, again, I think I like this kid. He says to me, hey man, can you record drums that sound like the Beatles? And I was like, man, what are you talking about? And we had been, if you guys don't know, we haven't done any like tours of the studio or anything like that, but my studio has a control room, and then we have the big room that you and I are sitting in now. And the control room is in there, and there are two windows that look into it. And one of those windows that looks out here was covered with a piece of foam. So we had worked in the control room and the vocal booth the whole night, and you couldn't see out here. And you didn't know that this was out here, and you said, well, where do you record those drums? And I said, out there. And you said, what are you talking about, man? And I opened the door, and it was like a kid at Christmas time.
Yeah, this is like Willy Wonka or something, like little door back there, and it's like, whoa, what is behind there?
Oh, man.
But it was crazy because there are very few studios here in Greensboro that have live rooms, and that have live rooms with the setup that you have kits, you have isolation booths, the whole nine. So, and guitar amps, Marshall amps, all this stuff in here. So it's like a playground in here. So when I come here to work, it's like there's nothing that I can't dream of doing. And the fact that you like really study. So I can call out the Beatles, I can call out Hendrix, I can call out a bunch of different artists that I'm trying to channel the sound, and you know exactly how to get that sound, whether it be a vocal effect, whether it be tuning the drums a certain way, whether it be the amps, the effects, and miking the amp, the live guitar amps, not going direct, and doing it and after we record it, it's going down like that.
That's what it is.
Yeah, so a lot of the recording techniques are very similar to how they used to do it back in the day, and that is so important with recapturing that sound. So, so I love that. And you play.
Well,
so that's the biggest thing. So I always try to work with engineers that have that are musicians also too, because when you hear something and nobody else is in the studio, you can say, hey man, let me get some guitar on that.
You got to be able to do a little bit of everything, man. It's and
Benji can play. He can channel any guitarist that I name.
Oh,
he knows their style, and he can channel it, and it always comes out just as I envisioned it. So he's a guitar guy. One, he's a guitar guy, and two, he was really into the MTV era. That was me, man. His writing, his arrangements, his playing, all of that it takes you very much into that time period where MTV was so huge. So I can channel that 90s, 2000 period when I work with you also too. So it's more than just having a studio and equipment in here. It's the person that's in here and what they bring to it and what they can get, because as a producer, you have all this information and ideas in your head, but you still have to have the right people around you to help you facilitate those ideas and get them out. So
yeah, man.
The engineer is so important. So that's why I love Earthtones Studio. It's the best studio in Greensboro to me.
Man, I appreciate you saying that. I didn't pay you to say that. I can, though, if you want me to. I might have.
It's the truth. It's the truth, man. I feel like I'm in L.A. or New York working when I'm in here.
Well, I mean, the best part about working when you come in is that I know that we're assembling pieces of a puzzle that we're not necessarily putting together at that time.
Yeah.
I know that we can get 3 or 4 versions of something. I can give you 5 or 6 guitar takes. We can get some drum takes out of Tracy or somebody like that. We can do all that and send you a lot of options. Then what amazes me is what comes back. Because half the time I'll be like, wait a minute, did I play on that? Did I cut those drums? Because he will do things in a way after he gets them, because because a lot of this whole business is about a lot of it is about vision.
Yeah.
And there's people who don't understand vision, and that's fine, man. There's when you think the way that you and I think, you think that everybody thinks that way.
Yeah.
Because you think that way.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time for you to realize that everybody's brain doesn't work that way.
Right.
Sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes it's a curse.
No, it's always pieces to the puzzle. Like, I always think about Phil Spector and Sly Stone and how they produced, and it would take them multiple sessions just to get the track together. So we may cut the live drums here and guitars here, but then I'm going home into my home studio and I'm adding things on top of that. So to make a record, it takes me probably a couple of weeks to get all the parts together. And then after I even get it together, I'll hear something and I'll come back in the studio with Tracy Thornton, and he'll lay some live drums on top of program drums that I have. So I'm constantly, building this thing so it becomes this grand thing, so that when you do sit down to write and record vocals, you have this wall of sound and ideas and colors and things to inspire you.
There's a vibe to it.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Your vibe lately, I can't say what your vibe was previously or where it changed, or if it changed across artists that you work to, and we'll get to all that too, man. I know that a lot of your vibe lately is that retro rock sounding thing, and I'm like, well, shit, I can do that.
In your sleep. He does it in his sleep. And so I always surround myself
I can
with
record
music.
it. I won't say I can necessarily play it, but I'm saying I can get that sound.
When I say, Benji, give me a Beatles-esque change here, like what would Lennon and McCartney do in this space, and he would come up with something that feels like John is in the studio actually laying it down. So I love awesome. That when I'm working with people that can channel those time periods, channel those type of artists and things like that, because it's very eclectic. But also too, the match of something that I came up on, which was live instrumentation, and at the same time then putting program sounds on it, on top of it, because that's what everybody's using now. So you get a bit of the retro, but you also get some of what is going on today. Yeah. And I feel like when you confuse those things together, it allows you to have a wide audience, because it's something that, older people like, but it's also something that newer people like. So it still fits in. It's not like you're doing this throwback album that doesn't really have a space. Right. In popular music.
Well, it has a familiarity to it in either the sound or the instrumentation or whatever. But then, like I said, when you bring things, we'll cut things on the front end. Like on the front end, I mean, when if he has say he comes in and has a program drum part that he says, I like these drums, but I want real drums that are something like this, but have some variations to it. And we start to kind of build that thing. I don't know where it's going. And and you have to realize with this job, I don't have time to ask. I can't. He could explain it. You could explain that to me 50 different ways. I'm never going to know what's inside your head until I hear it come out of the speakers. And I can just give you what you just say, I want a drum that sounds like this. I get it, and you go like, yeah, that's good. And we send it all, and then it comes back. And again, you said there'll be things that we've done here, real instrumentation that's been cut up or whatever, and then I get it back, or you'll come back to cut something else, vocals or more guitars or something, and there'll be 50 other things added. Yeah. I don't know where they came from.
No. The session doesn't end here. Like, after I leave here at 2:00 in the morning, I'm going in and editing and arranging all of the stuff that we laid in here and whatnot. And the thing that I just love about it more than anything is just being able to to get whatever I need here, and to be able to take it home and expand on it even more,
Yeah, and it's cool, man. I mean, and this is, like I say, this is a lot of times it's cool because it's a starting point. And I learn things as an engineer, and I learn things as a producer myself from other producers and other engineers. And the thing is, you'll bring things back in, and I'll look at the way you have your Pro Tools session laid out, and I'll be like, What do you do? What are you doing? And what is that plug-in? And what did you do? And you're like, oh, that's so-and-so, so-and-so. You don't know that? And I'm like, no, I don't know it.
Well, vice versa. Like, we learn the new plug-ins and new technology from each other. I learn how to get certain effects that especially when it comes to like slapback and retro vocal effects. I learned a lot of that from you, because I put in my Spotify a playlist of different songs. Like, when I hear something that has a great vocal effect on it, I'll put it in my playlist so that when I come here, I can play you that record and say, Benji, how can I recreate this vocal effect in the studio? But also, too, you know, it's about having the ideas of what you want. Like, even with a guitar solo, I'll have an idea of what the tone should sound like and what the feel should be. But I know that you're actually going to add your thing to it, because it's not like playing a programmed sound. It's like there's a human element in it that you're going to add to it that I can't even fathom before you actually play it. I just know this is the tone and this is the vibe, but you're going to add your human element to it and your signature way of playing to it that's not going to sound like anybody else out there.
Right.
And, you know, and the thing that when I'm making these records, I'm trying to bring the guitar solo back to radio, because I remember.
Thank God somebody is.
Yeah. Like
no,
I remember.
There are songs that are trying to do that too, but not the, you know, I mean, and even in the day, first thing to get cut in the radio edit was the guitar solo.
The guitar solo, right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's 8 bars. So it's like 15, 20 seconds. But the thing about it is that I'll hear guitar solos on the radio now, but they'll just be like noodling or whatever. It's nothing really distinct. But I remember, like, when I heard Beat It, I knew the guitar solo word for line for line, and I didn't play guitar, but I knew it. And that's where air guitar started and all of those things, is because you knew the solos. Mm-hmm. And so the thing about it is, like, they're so melodic, and there's something that the listener always can sing along with, because they remember note for note what the solo was.
Yeah, man.
So I want to bring that back. I want to bring live drums back. I know there was a time where a lot of British rock bands were doing fills every 4 bars. Mitch Mitchell and all these guys were doing a bunch of fills. So I want to bring that back, because that brings the intensity back to the record. So, you know, programming is cool, but I think there's certain records that you need that live feel to, like, really give it an intense feel when those records come out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just the element, even if you're cutting things, like, say you're cutting up samples and you come in here and say you track real drums, and then you are cutting up samples and taking it back. Even the variation, you know, if you don't go and stretch and quantize those, even the variation within the bar that you create is different than if everything is just on 100%. The grid and programmed. 100%. And that has that you can't, like you said, there's a human element to all of it, no matter whether you sample it or what. If it's samples of real whatever, there's a human element to that timing that just either makes it or it doesn't.
Well, that's the beauty of this whole thing, is that I always say, like, so people do a lot of programming, but when you programming now, you're quantizing and you're putting it directly on the beat and everything. But when you have the human element to it, it's like you're not going to play guitar the same way that this guy's going to play guitar or this guy's going to play it. So automatically it has a different sound than anybody else. Yeah. And if you notice, all the greatest producers and artists, they had signature in their music. And when you have a signature way of playing, a signature style of playing, it separates you from everybody. I work with this guy, Andre Phoenix, who played on a bunch of my records. And he doesn't call himself a guitar player, but he plays guitar like he's playing the drums. So it's more of a percussive thing. Same thing with Charlie Hunter is like that.
Yeah,
a very percussive thing where he's damn near playing the bass and the guitar like it's a drum. And when you do that, it has a whole different feel than the next person or whatever.
Well, it's like it's like those guys. And as a guitar player, it took me a long time to realize this, that in all of this stuff, like, I can learn how to play 50,000 notes and whatever, but rhythm is king.
Definitely.
If you don't have rhythm, you can play all those notes you want to, but if you're playing them out of time and you got no feel on how to play them, and, you know, I watch as guitar players especially get older, you know, everybody talks about feel and playing with one note, and it's like sometimes that's a cop out and sometimes it's not. But I mean, it's you got to be able to play in time, and in real time, not on top of everything. And you have to know how to adjust that all on the fly. So, you know,
and plus all them guys were like doing acid and all this stuff back in the day, so I know they weren't playing on beat, exactly on the beat.
I know, right?
But they were definitely giving you a vibe and a feel and whatnot. And I even noticed that, like, when I'm recording vocals, like, I'll record a reference and have a singer come in and sing something, and they're having trouble getting the timing, and I was like, I'm good, but I can't be that good. I'm like, but it's like the timing is something that I'm really good at, like in between the bars. And I think that's what separates you. It makes it special. It gives it a certain vibe that not everybody can do. So I love that.
And the space and that stuff. Like
Yeah.
when you make space and then you have a player come in and play on it, and the first thing they try to do is fill that space in. You're like, nah, boss, that's not what you're here for.
And that's the thing, that's so important that you mention space, because you're trying to fit all of these sounds into these pockets and make it all work in conjunction with each other. So when you're talking about the accents and the things that the bass player is doing and making sure it finds a space in the mix, and the same thing with the guitar player when he's playing rhythm and all that. So all that stuff has to work in conjunction with each other,
man,
and fit where they're not stepping on top of each other.
Yeah, and when you start to put it all together, when you start to put all these pieces together, the first instrument, I mean, it's like, and I think about it like, and I mix like this too. I think about it like building a house. Like you start with a foundation, and you can't just, I can't in the brick foundation of a home, I can't cram all the steps and and all that stuff in that. It's like you have to have a foundation to build on, and it's really hard. It's really hard to explain to people. I mean, players, studio players, that's why they're studio players. Because they come in and they're just like, what do you want me to play? And you tell them that's what you want them to play, and that's what they play. And they know that you have a purpose, the vision, that you don't have to explain that to them. They know this guy knows why he's asking me to play this. I'm going to go ahead and just play this, and everything's going to be cool. As opposed to, man, this guy don't know what he's talking about, and I'm not playing enough. I'm going to fill in all this stuff right here, and then you ain't getting called back.
Well, that's the most important thing about a producer, is being able to communicate with the musicians. Even if you don't play, you don't know notes, it's like you still have to be able to communicate to them to get the best out of them, for them to really understand what you're trying to convey to them so that they can give it to you. And so for me, like, I don't play guitar. I mean, I play chords, but I don't play but I study it, and I study great guitarists and all these different things, so that when I want to incorporate that, I can call out the guitarists. I love working with other guitarists like yourself that know those guitarists, and they know their style of playing, so you can call them out and be like, this feels like something Santana would do. So give me a solo that feels like that, or Jimmy Page or whatever. Like, you can call it out, and they know how to get into that space and give you that. You know?
So let's go backwards.
Okay.
All right. Let's start with young Fanatic. You're from here. You're from Greensboro, and we're in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I have to tell everybody that, because you don't realize how far-reaching all these things immediately become, and people are like, "Where are you talking about here?" Like, where is here?
Definitely.
So you actually attended a program at a school that my son is actually at now. At Weaver Academy.
Yes.
And that to me is amazing, because that speaks volumes about getting kids and young people interested in producing and doing what it is that you have ended up doing as a career on an early, on the early. And so tell me about your time there, and how you, and basically, because there's going to be a lot of young cats watching this, and the question that I get all the time from young guys, they come in here and they want to be where people are, and there's this vast canyon of unknown in between where they're at and where these people that they aspire to be are. And they do not know the first step about how to get there, how it happened. And so, and a lot of things are, I don't want to say chance, but I mean, there's a lot of things where you have situations that happen that you just can't calculate within your career. So my thing is, how did you? What was the first step that you took to go? This is what I'm doing to get myself out of somewhere like where you started with Weaver Academy. I'm going to take this information, then I'm going to go and I'm going to do, like, what was the first step that you took?
Well, of course, you played in band. I played the saxophone in 7th and 8th grade, but then started getting introduced to hip-hop. Started hearing hip-hop records on the radio and things like that. So I saw Weaver Education Center, and I think I went to some summer program, and that's when I saw all the things that you could do over at Weaver. and you could get off campus, so it wasn't like sitting in a classroom every day. So I was like, okay, let me see what's up with Weaver. So I went there and I signed up for the electronic music class. And that was the first time I ever got introduced to drum machines, learning how to program drum machines and synthesizers and things like that. I had never done that before. So Ron Follis was our teacher at the time. I met my best friend Eli Davis, who now manages Anthony Hamilton there. And he and I were really the only ones in the class that had a real love for hip hop. So we were in there actually, because when hip hop first came out, it was just drum machines. They weren't doing anything other than programming drum machines. So you would have a whole record with a guy just rapping over a drum machine.
Right.
Later on, and sometimes they would just rap over an instrumental, or a whole band would play on it. But if you didn't have a budget to hire a band to come in the studio and create an instrumental for you to rap over, you were just rapping over a drum machine.
Right.
So we would hear these Run DMC records. I think Sucker MCs was the record out at the time that was just strictly a Lindrum. And so we were in there learning how to program on the Yamaha drum machine. So that was the first time I really got introduced to actually making beats on a drum machine. And from there, after I went there like 2 years, I purchased my first drum machine, my own drum machine, over at Music Loft. And so,
that's the first place I ever saw an 808.
Yes,
yep.
Right. Yep. So when I saw that, I bought a drum machine. I got into a hip hop band here with Ski, who is from here, that Eli introduced me to. I was working with Mixmaster D, who was also a DJ, and he mixed records. He kind of turned me on to hip hop. And I would go to his house all the time, and he would play all these different hip hop records. Every Friday, we would go to the Greensboro Record Center with Susie, and we would get the latest hip-hop record. And back then, it was so beautiful because you could just look at the Def Jam label, and you knew it was good, or the
right.
Profile label, and you knew it was good. You didn't have to know who the artist was there, but you just saw the label, and you knew it was good.
And that was the to me, that was always the proving ground. Is you're standing in front of this rack of records, and you're like, all right, what am I? And it was like gambling. It was like the lottery. What am I?
Because you only got enough to get one or two records.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't know, and you don't know what you're getting, but you cross some fingers.
Yeah, and that was like, Motown. I'm assuming like when my parents grew up and they were buying Motown records, like you could believe in the label that Motown was going to give you a quality record every time. So it was the kind of same thing with Profile and Def Jam. And so we would buy records. We started buying equipment. We had a little scam going on with Sears where we would get equipment. He worked at Sears, so we would get equipment from Sears. I pulled the car, back it up to the loading dock, and we would put tape decks and turntables and all kinds of stuff in the back of the car. But so we would always start creating music at home. In his house, and then that was me rapping over something, a drum machine with him DJing. We started getting our records on AM radio because we knew the DJ there. So to be in high school and have your record playing on the radio every morning before you go to class and people listening to it, it was kind of like a big deal at the time.
It was extremely big deal.
So that's where I started with my love for it. From there, I went to music school in Atlanta at the Art Institute of Atlanta.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I went there and I studied the music business. I got really introduced to the music business down there. Jermaine Dupri was there. Speech from Arrested Development was there. Atlanta was blowing up with the Face Records was just coming to town.
Now, they were instructors there or they were students there?
No, they were students. They were students there.
Get out.
Yeah. So,
now, see, that's cool, man.
Yeah, so that was my first time really being around real people that are in the industry. Like I said, LaFace Records was there. They were blowing up. Bobby Brown was huge at that time, so he basically had the whole pulse of the city. So that's where I really believed that it could be possible because I was actually seeing people that I would run into that were actually making records. And then I believed it was possible. So came back home and we did an independent label called Payroll Records, and we were getting on New York radio, which at the time, you couldn't get on New York radio if you weren't from New York.
Right.
But we studied, I was mentored by Biz Markie and Clark Kent and these DJs that used to come down and do shows down here with these major artists. And so I was mentored by them on how to actually produce a record, from how to set up your intro to your arrangement. All these things were so important. The arrangement was the biggest, it was the most important thing.
Right.
And when I look back at producers like Phil Spector, it was about his arrangement. It
Right.
was about, the wall of sound. It was all these different things. So that's where I learned how to produce records. And from there, we had some success in New York, produced a bunch of classic hip hop records. And from there, it was just,
Then the
journey
phone.
started.
Then the phone started ringing.
Right.
So what's cool is when I hear you talk about these guys, I hear you talk about Jermaine Dupri, I hear you talk about Biz Markie. They weren't at the level that people know them as now from their careers.
Right.
They were on somewhat the same kind of level as you. Mm-hmm. So I always try to tell kids coming through here and young people that are trying to do this, at the level that they're at.
Right.
I always tell them, I'm like, look at your friends now, because they're the ones that are you're all going to pull each other through this whole thing. All it takes is, like, you got a circuit of 10 friends. Right. All it takes is one of you to strike, and then it's like, okay, and it's not like you're necessarily on for the ride, but at the same time, if you all kind of know what's up, once one of you knows, the other 9 are going to figure it out real fast.
Well, that was the whole thing about when we moved to New York City. People that we were hanging out with, you would see them get record deals. You would see them land placements on different albums and things like that. And when you start seeing your inner circle, the people, friends that you hang out with, start having success, then immediately you become very optimistic it can happen, because like, I work on production just as hard as he does.
Exactly, man.
Or I'm just as good as him, and he's making it happen. So I know it's possible to happen. So that's how we believed it could happen. And at this time, not a whole lot of artists were coming out of Greensboro. So going back and forth to New York was so essential in us being able to actually be in the mix when hip hop was first taking off.
Yeah. That's so cool, man. I mean, and to me, just hearing that and hearing the amount of drive that you had at an early age to do this.
Yeah.
The amount of drive to be able to do this, but looking the whole time. And you're saying, I went to the Art Institute, I was mentored by people. I think that's so cool, man. So what was your first major hit out of that New York hip hop scene, getting songs on, New York hip hop radio? What was your first major hit that you would go? That was the first major.
Was Crush on You by Lil Kim. A guy by the name of Sincere Thompson knew Eli and I used to go up to New York on the weekends, and we used to stay at his place. And so we always had these jobs, these third shift jobs, where we work 3 days and we take 4 days off. So when you're doing that, immediately after you get off work on that third day, you're hitting the highway and you're going to New York. So you're sleeping on this guy's couch for like 4 days in New York City. And he's in the city every day. He works for a label, so he knows everybody. So he's going to industry parties, mixers, he's going to the studio, all these different things. So he knew Lil Kim's manager, and he's like, go to the Hip Factory and hang out in front of the Hip Factory. And you'll see, when you see Lil Kim's manager, just tell him that you know me, tell him you have tracks for Lil Kim. So I knew the Hip Factory was the spot.
So literally, that's how that happened.
Yeah, that was the spot where every day around 5 o'clock you'd see all these SUVs pull up, and you see a who's who of superstars coming out of there, going up in the Hip Factory. Because the Hip Factory was like the hangout. So it was like, people were in the lounge, in the lobby, everywhere. You knew when you were in there, everybody used to just hang out in there and something was going to happen. So the thing what he said is that it was like, at the time, I was working out of Ultimate Studios, and they had one of the first CD burners. And at that time, that's when CDs were like $20.
Right.
So I would put all my tracks on CD where everybody else had them on DAT. So I put them on CD because when you get in the meeting, you could just go through the tracks just like that.
Totally.
And so from the time I got off work, third shift, working at Super 8 Hotel as a desk clerk.
I love it, man. See, I didn't know that either.
Yes, I would get off.
You don't know how much information that we're doing these podcasts. I find out about my friends. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. But that's good. Keep going.
I was a third shift desk clerk. So as soon as I got off work, I would sleep to 12. I got off at 7 a.m., sleep to 12, and I would make beats all the way until it was time, 11 o'clock the next night to go to work. So, and we would go to collectibles, and we would buy vinyl. Just buy so much vinyl, jazz, rock, everything, right? And so the thing about it is, by the time I got to New York, I had probably 200 tracks. I just had like so many tracks. So I had a lot to play for artists. And what what really got me over how I ended up working with Puffy, how I ended up working with Vincent Herbert is like they were so impressed by my work ethic and how many tracks I always had, arsenal of tracks. So I always had something to play for them. So when I got to Lil Kim, Biggie asked me to come upstairs and play some tracks. So I started playing tracks for them, and it was quiet in the room. I play and go to the next one. They didn't even say go to the next one. I was just playing them, and if I didn't hear anything, then I play the next one. So by the time I got to my last track, I didn't hear nothing. So I was just like, well, I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to play you tracks. Thanks a lot, right? And as I was packing my stuff up to go out, he was like, play track 7, 13, 21, 25, and 38, right? So the whole time they're back there rolling their weed, he's actually writing down the numbers.
Right.
So the tracks that hit him, he wrote the numbers down, and then I played the tracks again. And the next thing I know, I'm in the studio with Mace, Biggie, and Lil Kim, and Little C's, like, making songs every single day in the Hip Factory. Well, they got the Hip Factory blocked out, so you're in there all day just laying down tracks, and they're writing. And I'm learning from Biggie most importantly, arrangement. I'm learning about arrangement. I'm learning about how he's taking records that were very big hits back in the day and revamping them and choruses. I'm learning a whole lot about arrangement more than
how much of a complete eye-opener was that for you?
Oh, definitely.
To look at like, okay, this is Biggie, right? Everybody looks at like, and everybody looks at these. Everybody looks at all these. You call them stars at that point, you know,
right.
And you look at that because what you know is their stardom, and you know what you see on the surface,
right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, man, this cat knows how to arrange.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, all right, teach me everything you know. And it's like the fact that this guy's Biggie is still there, but at the same time now you're like, man, this cat's got.
Well, the thing about it is I learned like this is why this whole movement is blowing up, because he's not just a rap artist. He's actually a producer. He has ideas. He has concepts. He knows how to get Lil Kim, because Lil Kim didn't even like the track that I gave her. She didn't even like the track. But, and mind you, this is a track I did like maybe a year before that. So that also tells you is like, don't ever get discouraged if people don't buy your tracks right away, because every track that I've ever sold was something I did 6 months to a year to 2 years before that.
It's already on your back burner.
Right. I've already moved on. But she didn't like it, but he knew exactly what kind of impact this track was going to have. So he went back and made her do it, because originally Little C's just did the record. And when they put the album out, everybody gravitated to that song. So he made her go back in the studio and put her verse on it. So even though she didn't like the song, I know every time she gets ready to come out with a new album, because my ASCAP statements go up, because she's got to perform that song. DJ start playing that song. That song is like her biggest hit, and it's a staple in her career. So the thing about it is, what I learned about him is just like him being able to get the artist whatever he had to say to her to get her to do the record. Because sometimes artists don't really see the vision, and you have to be able to convince them to do the record. And like we look at Clive Davis all the time, talks about how artists, he pitches songs to them and they didn't want to do the record, but he saw something in it and got them to do the record eventually, right. And they end up becoming big hit records. So it's more than just the actual production aspect. It's about getting the best out of the people that they can't see the vision and being able to
right fit,
right.
And the right fit for stuff. I mean, there's
right.
how many tracks have you ever heard about? Like you're talking about iconic tracks that eventually somebody does them,
right.
and they become a major hit,
yeah.
And then there's 10 other singers at the time
right.
that say, well, we all passed on that song because we didn't like it, and but they could have easily done a song like that and may not have taken off,
right.
Because maybe it wasn't the right fit, maybe
right.
it was, I don't know, maybe it's Providence, I don't know, but right. It's crazy to see that all these pieces of that puzzle, they're all creative pieces too. Even arrangement. I mean,
right.
and me growing up as a rock kid, as a player, like we all learned how to play.
Right.
When sampling and all that stuff happened, that was like, to us, it was like there wasn't as much to us as players. We're like, well, there's not as much talent involved
right.
in that, and then as as I grow older into this career that I do, I'm like, you know, man, it's all arrangement. I don't care if you're
100%
going in and figuring out that sample on that record is going to cut at this point, and then I'm going to arrange it. It's like, I don't care if you got a record player in your hands or if I got a guitar in my hands. It's like you still got to know what's going to happen at that next step.
The arrangement is the most important thing, especially now. The arrangement is the most important thing because, you know, we consume so much music, right? The first 30 seconds of a record is the most important part, period, because we all know people that skim through records, skim through songs, and if you can't capture their attention in the first 30 seconds, they're moving on to the next record. So I think about that when I'm shooting video. I'm thinking about that when I'm making records because it's so much content that's coming at us at one time. We don't really invest the time into like get all the way through the song to decide whether or not you like it. It's like if it doesn't catch you in the first 30 seconds, you check out. So arrangement is so important with being able to capture. And once you get them, lock them in, you still have to lock them in. You have to keep them engaged. So the record has to constantly be building. It has to constantly be building. And so those drops are so important when you're pulling the beat out. Certain instrumentation that comes in that makes the record grow and feel different, and the B sections and things like that. All of those things, especially when you're dealing with guitars, because when I'm working with you and other guitarists, I probably put like 10, 20 different guitar tracks in there and color it different ways, whether it's rhythm, whether it's wah-wah, whether it's distortion, all these different things. So you got to constantly be fitting those things in there so that the song is just constantly building and it's interesting versus just being linear. And how many songs now like that I really pay attention to radio, you know, and you listen to the length of a song. It's the songs that you hear now that you know are 3 minutes. You know that they have to be three and a half, maybe max, maybe 3.5 if you know somebody. And the best arranged ones are the ones that feel like you've listened to a 10-minute track. Oh yeah. Definitely.
You know what I mean? They got all the right stuff. They got all the right pacing. They got all that. And those are the things that when it really gets down to the details of all this stuff, you can have the right chord progression. You can have the right singer. You can have that. But like you said, at the very end, man, you've got to have the right arrangement.
You know? I use Splice as one of my tools. Like after I lay the foundation with bass guitars and drums like that, I find all these sounds on Splice that are
Splice, that's what you turn me on to that too, because I was like, where do you get all these samples?
These sounds, you hear them all over the records on the radio. But I probably, after I get the foundation on the track, probably spend about 2 to 3 hours just going through sounds and pulling sounds off of there, right? Which is so tedious. But once you get all the sounds, now you have to narrow it down and put the sounds in the right places in the track that allows the song to keep building. So it's a huge process. But when it's done and you hear it, and these are processed sounds, so it's almost like the record's already mixed anyway. So it sounds really big, really great. Like if you type in 808 under Splice, there's probably like 20 million 808 that come up.
That's true.
But you got to go through it and you got to play them against your track and see what feels good and what fits and things like that. So it's a long process with producing a record that, you know, the arrangement is the most important part of it.
And I know when you bring stuff back in here too, not going back to that, but speaking of Splice, you'll bring things back in here, and it's your choice of what samples that you're going to put against that production as to how well they work and what the total, what the sum of all of it ends up being. You can't just grab, like you say, just can't grab the first 808 on the list and go, great, it's 808. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And you're trying to force it. So I'll hear things that you bring in here that you've put back into a production that we've cut some stuff here, and I have to ask you, Where'd you cut those vocals? And you just look at me, and that's the look right there. That's the smile right there. And you're like, Splice, man. And I'm like, what? And I'm thinking that you've cut these vocals somewhere to fit perfectly in that song.
No, my whole album, the Billy Lennox record that I'm working on now, the whole album is live bass, live guitar, some live drums, and Splice on top of it as the icing on the cake. So, you know, I use it all through my album. You know, I'm hoping Splice is going to give me an endorsement after this album goes gold.
Hey Splice, are you listening?
And
Are you listening, Splice?
I get album of the year. I can say that I used Splice on the whole record. So.
But I want to say too, not that I talk to a lot of companies about things, and as far as, you know, product endorsements and things like that, and the people at Ubershaw have been cool enough to hook me up with they have a wonderful software called Elastic, Elastik, which I need to turn you on to. It's an incredible sampler. It's deeper than I have time for most days. And so I want to say a shout out to them. Like, as if I have to sample stuff and I can put it in there or use their packs are really killer. They're really manipulable, and they're just things that you wouldn't expect to hear a lot of times.
Right.
And so the interface is pretty genius on it too.
Well, you got a lot of equipment companies that reach out to you to use their products also too, which is so great that you're one of the first people to test some of these products that they're putting out. Yeah. Some of them, yeah, definitely, man. So let's talk about, not the elephant in the room. Let's talk about your Grammy. Oh.
Shall we do that?
Yes, let's talk about that. So,
I haven't had a chance to say that yet on my podcast. Let's talk about your Grammy.
Yeah, so
tell me the feeling from the kid from the borough that was working the 3 days a week, driving to New York on the other 4 days, sleeping on a couch, and then to have the Queen Bee say your name.
Well, that was the biggest thing. That was even bigger than the Grammy to me, because on her first album that I worked on, I did a record called Speechless, that it was so many big names on her first record that were producing on that record, from Scott Storch to, you know, everybody, right?
Wow.
So when you got all these big names on the record, Rich Harrison, Scott Storch, all these different people, right? You don't really think of yourself in that same, you know, class with these producers, because they have records all over the radio, and she just gives you a shot, and now you're on the album. But the thing about it is,
let's tell everybody who she is.
Oh,
we'll go ahead and say it's Beyonce.
And so the thing about it is that I knew that the record I gave her was a record that gave her a chance to do something she had never done before. Because before, she had done records that were just talking about relationships and love and things. This was the first record that she was actually talking about an erotic encounter. And so for her to go from being in a girl group, this was the record that was going to change everything for her as an adult. She was being seen as an adult now, and so everything that she wrote about on that album was like the transition for her. And this was like her coming out record of saying, you know, I'm a woman now, so I'm talking about, you know, sex now. And so when you do that record on her, I gave her the track, and the track to me felt very erotic and whatnot. And so when I gave it to them, which I didn't hear back from them for like 7 months, right?
And how did you get through them quickly?
Okay, so I was in the studio with Dave Pensado mixing a Boyz II Men record.
You better shut your mouth, you know, Dave Pensado. I'm going to knock you out. I didn't know that.
I just happened to be in the studio, and somebody was telling me about him, so I went down to his room. I played him the record. He loved the record, so we ended up mixing the record.
So as an engineer, I watch Pensado's place all the time.
Yeah, he's the real deal. And the thing about Dave is, he always has people coming in. He's worked with everybody, so he's always got people coming in and out of the studio.
He did a lot of that Pink stuff, right?
Yes. So he had just done that record. So a lot of people are coming in and out of the studio. So when I'm in there with him, a girl shows up that knows him. Turns out the girl had worked with, Dave had mixed some Beyonce records, so he knew her through that, right?
Right.
Turns out the girl went to the Art Institute of Atlanta. So when he introduced me and we started talking, the girl was like, oh, you went to the Art Institute of Atlanta also? I was like, yeah. I was like, that's where I first started learning how to produce, right? And so, because I didn't even know what a producer was before that. I didn't even know I was producing until I went there and they told me, this is what a producer does. And I was like, oh, I've been doing that the whole time. I didn't even know that's what it was.
I just thought that's what I was supposed to do, right? Yep.
So she was like, she tells me, you got anything for Beyonce? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I gave her the track. I didn't hear nothing from them. I didn't hear anything from them for like 6 months. And then one night, I get this call in the middle of the night, and they were like, you got to be at the Hit Factory tomorrow to mix the record. I said, mix what record? You said, the Beyonce record. I said, I don't have any Beyonce records. He said, yeah, she wrote to one of your tracks and recorded it, and now it's on the album, so they got to mix it tomorrow. And I was like, what? so next,
that was a fun call.
Yeah, I'm in the studio with her the next day, and we're mixing the record. And so the thing about it is, I know from the conversation we had that day that this record really meant something to her. It made a statement. And the thing about it is, when I did the track, it felt very erotic and sexual. And when they wrote it, it was exactly what I was trying to convey. So it showed me the power of your music and being able to speak to people through your music, because what I was thinking was exactly what they wrote about. And so it was perfect, and she just killed it. And so I knew the record really meant something to her, because it showcased the side of her she had
What's
never
the name
done.
of that track again?
Speechless.
Okay.
And so it's on the Dangerously in Love album. And so when she said my name, it wasn't just that she said my name. I saw her multiple times after that, and she always was so excited to see me every time. So I knew the record really meant something to her. She talked about it all the time in interviews. I was on the EPK when she did the album EPK,
Great,
and she
man.
was talking about it. And she even told me that in rehearsals, Prince's band learned the record and played the record for her in rehearsals. And Prince told my lawyer this was like his favorite record of all time. So that's the ultimate compliment. So when you hear all this and she shouts your name out, I know that record meant something to her. So when the moment happened, it just blew me away that, like, not that she won, but that I was just mentioned along with these great producers. So I knew that record really meant something to her, and it always will. And so many people hit me on Instagram and YouTube and talk about that record and talk about how impactful that record was when they were in college or whatever. They used to listen to that record all the time, and people will try to cover it and sing it and all this thing. So it just shows you the power of music, and you're making this music in your bedroom, and all of a sudden it's touching the world and having a different effect on all these different people in so many different ways. So
cool, man.
Yeah, it's
so
an
cool.
amazing experience.
And I mean, and even when it happens at that level, you're still, you're still like, you can't believe it happened.
Right.
You're glad it happened, but you can't believe it happened. But you got to kind of play it cool. Yeah, I mean, you have to play it cool the whole time professionally anyway.
Well,
but at
that
the
was
same
my
time-
whole career anyway. Like when I'm producing all these artists, I don't really have a full grasp of what's going on. It's just happening, and my phone is just constantly ringing, and you're doing it. But then when you come out of it, then you start realizing the impact of it. Because like I said the other day on Instagram, it's like you're always chasing the next hurdle, the next accomplishment, the next thing.
Yeah,
so
man.
you don't really get to think about your career in retrospect unless you do one of these shows and they're talking about it. But for me, I'm always on to the next thing. So this is these are these moments where you really get to think about it. It's like, oh wow, I forgot I did that. Yeah, I did that. Oh wow, So, but when you're in it, you're not even really thinking about it. At least I
because,
wasn't.
like you said, it's on to. It's like
Right.
that's done.
Right.
And especially now too, man, because it's so everything recycles and
Right.
turns over so fast.
Yeah,
that
more
it's
than
not
ever
like
now.
you just don't get time to revel in the and sit and just go, man, look what I did,
Yeah.
because you're busy doing the next.
I mean, I'm like that with my album. I'm like 17 songs in on the Billy Lennox project, but music ideas are still coming in. So when you think about those first couple of songs that you did that you thought were so great, like you're like, oh, yeah, all right, I'm on to this thing now. So
Yeah.
you know what? Prince always talks about that throughout his career. It was always about, by the time he finished the album, he was on to the next album.
Totally.
And so it was like the record company wants you to put out the record and promote it for a year. Then they want you to tour another year before you start your next record. But he's already past that because he had to live it. He had to write about it and record it and then put it out.
Yeah.
That's like 3 to 4 years of like that music. And, when you're having so many musical ideas, you're moving on to something else. So it's during the time when he was doing it, the record companies didn't understand it. But now artists put out a record 2 and 3 times a year.
Yeah.
So they get it now. But at the time, they were telling him, you're putting music out too fast. They can't consume it and everything. And they were wrong.
Well, and consumers too. Like when you look at the lifespan of a record or a song or whatever, you don't realize that as a consumer, the day that single is released is the first day in the life of that song to the listener.
Yeah.
Man, you've been working on that, you've been living in that thing for how long, and you're done with it, man.
Yeah.
And so when they get it, like you said, it's really hard. You can't start all over again with that song at the day that it's released and go like, hey, this is like day one. Like you've been working on it, and that's like a lot of stuff that we work on in here, especially this past year with the pandemic.
Right.
Has just been compiling, and now finally, with all this stuff with the world kind of opening back up, all these records are coming out.
Right.
And I'm like, man, I can't even. That's a year and a half ago.
Definitely. A lot. Like I said, a lot of the records that I ended up placing on these artists were records that I did 6 months to 2 years, 3 years before that. I had everybody that makes music has a hard drive of arsenal of records in there and there'll be hit records that in your mind they feel like a hit record that just takes forever to place, but I always say a good song will always find a home. So you just keep stacking them until you have that moment, because at some point in your career as a producer, you're going to be that guy that they just hang on your every word. So if you say, yeah, this is the record, they're like, are you sure? Yeah, this is the record. This is the record right here. And so I look at Pharrell and the Neptunes and them, where they're just unloading their catalog of all these records they did a while ago, but they say this is going to be a hit record, and they put it out. So so that's the thing about it, is I just keep making music, man. It's going to find a home. Yeah,
exactly. So tell me about Michael Jackson.
Oh, wow. So we did this record. I'm
just going to pick your brain. This is the last superstar I'm going to pick your brain about, and then we're going to talk about Billy Lennox.
So, because that blows me away more than anything. So.
And me too, man. Like, I'm just like, I look at it and I'm like, that's at that. I mean, and at that time, that was the top of the top of the mountain, man.
Well, when you grow up watching Michael Jackson cartoons and buying his albums and things like that, and you just grew up with Michael Jackson. Especially being from Greensboro, North Carolina, you never think that you'll be in the same room with Michael Jackson. You don't even think you're gonna even see him or meet him. So the closest I got to is like going to a concert and seeing him on stage, but he's way up there and I'm way back there. So So I get this track, and it feels like Michael Jackson. So I was like, who do I know that loves Michael Jackson and can write Michael Jackson? So I find this writer, Teron Beale, and he writes the perfect Michael Jackson song. And then I'm like, okay, now when you go to the A&R, you got to make them feel Michael Jackson. So we find a reference singer that sounds like Michael Jackson. So I go get the reference singer. He gets the reference singer. I said, make sure the reference singer sounds like Michael. And they do the record, and it sounds like Michael. So it sounds like Michael, the track feels like Michael. Now we have to get it to Michael, right? But I'm like, you can't get to Michael Jackson. This is Michael Jackson. It's impossible.
Right.
So I was like, but I have been working with Virgin lately, and I know Janet Jackson, because all the Jacksons have a similar sound. So I was like, let me get it to Janet. So I go play the record for the A&R, and she's like, nobody will do this record. This record is about death. It was a record called Heaven Can Wait. And I was just like, no. She's like, nobody's going to do this record. It's about dying, and Janet's not going to do this. And so I was like, okay. So we end up selling the record to Babyface's brother, Kevon Edmonds, right? And they give us this stupid check at the time. It was like, I don't know, $35,000 for this song, right? And I'm like, it ain't Michael Jackson, but it is $35,000. So we go and cut the record. And while we're cutting the record, Teron is trying to make him sound like the reference. And Kevon Edmonds comes out of the booth, and he's just like, this dude's trying to make me sound like Michael Jackson. And he's like, I'm not Michael Jackson. I'm Kevon Edmonds. If you want it to sound like Michael Jackson, you need to go get a record of Michael Jackson. And the light bulb went off. And I was like, he's right.
Yeah.
And so I start playing 6 Degrees of Separation. And next thing you know, I was like, there's a guy named Kenny Quiller from Charlotte, North Carolina that I know that is Teddy Riley's assistant. Teddy Riley is working on Michael Jackson. I send him the song. 2 weeks later, Michael Jackson is standing in my face like this. And I'm like,
dude, that's the greatest.
Did this just happen? And so the whole time I'm talking to him, he's very sincere, very genuine. He stares you right in the face when he talks to you. And like, this is not Michael Jackson, hi, how you doing? And you keep it moving. This is Michael Jackson having a conversation with you about your music and telling you how much he loves it. So that's the beauty of it, is just like he really loved the song, I was trying to take him back to Lady in My Life because at that time, Michael was just, the slow songs were just like Heal the World type records.
Right.
He hadn't done a record about a woman in such a long time. I was like, this is going to take him back to that space. Once again, doing something different than what he's been doing, where he's talking about this love for a woman. And so he does the record, kills it. He ends up keeping some of the background vocals from the reference singer on the record.
That's cool.
And what was so interesting about it, he's such a perfectionist. Michael Jackson went and he has his vocal coach. So Michael Jackson came in the studio and went and got with his vocal coach and warmed up for like an hour and a half of just vocal exercises, and then came and sang for like 30 minutes and then left, right? But what blew me away about it is like his preparation. Like, I don't know, I've worked with a lot of singers, I don't know anybody that warmed up, did vocal exercises for an hour and a half before they came and sang. People just come in and they just start singing.
Right.
And so it let me know that like he was really a perfectionist, wanted to make sure he had a process, and he had been working at the same vocal coach forever. So all of these, working with all these different artists, Beyonce was such a perfectionist. She wasn't just a singer, she was involved in the mix. You know, the arrangement that I had, she came in there and changed stuff and was like, I want this here because I'm gonna sing this here. So she was really involved in the record. So I'm learning stuff from all of these artists, from Biggie and his arrangements to Beyonce and the arrangement on the track, from Michael Jackson and his process of how he approaches a song and warming up and preparing for it. So I'm learning from these icons all these important things that go into artistry and their process, and this is why they are who they are. Right. So I'm really in school the whole time while I'm learning this. And so, you know, it was just when I was doing the record on him, he's having a conversation with me, and immediately during the conversation, of course, he turns into Charlie Brown's teacher at that point. I don't know what he's saying to me, and I just bust out with this big Kool-Aid smile on my face, and I know he's looking at me like, what is this dude? Why is this guy smiling, right? But for me, it was like, it just hit me in that moment, like, this is Michael Jackson that you're talking to right now, and you're from Greensboro, North Carolina. I don't know anybody in Greensboro that has ever had a conversation with Michael Jackson standing this close to your face.
That's amazing.
And so
man.
It just blew me away, and so it's a very surreal moment and one that I'll never forget.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And the part about all those stories that have this common thread to me, speaking to younger people who might be listening to this, who might be coming up, wanting to do this, is that everything that you've mentioned on how you got these songs to people have to do with a circle of connections. Like you said, I'm going to play 6 Degrees of Separation. And the majority of the people that you knew weren't because you knew Michael Jackson already.
Right.
It was because you're like, man, I got to put these connection pieces together.
Look, that is the most important thing in the music business, period, and I still hang on that to today. Is like, and when I was doing it, it was just email. You couldn't, it was no Instagram, it was no text message, it was it was some text messages. But the thing about it is, I learned in that Michael Jackson moment that like, this is the biggest artist in the planet, and I got to him. So that showed me at that moment, you can get to anybody, because somebody that you know knows somebody, and you can get to them. And then once you have a discography of artists that you work with, once you start sending that around, everybody's going to be receptive to your call, because they're like, if he did this, then he's probably got some good music to share with us. So but 6 Degrees of Separation is the most important thing, and I hang on that to this day, that there's not a person on this planet that I can't get to through 6 Degrees of Separation.
Yeah, and you get and also too, once you figure out that part, it's sort of like the thing like you're talking about, where there's a when we were coming up, there was always such a, when I was coming up, it was such a disconnect in knowing anyone that did anything of that magnitude, or even in the business, right? But we always thought, man, if I could just get my songs to so-and-so, if I could just whatever. But when that happens, that's the other piece of the puzzle you got to be prepared for too.
Yeah.
You can't just sit and write a bunch of stuff that you think is the greatest and just go like, oh man, all I got to do is meet somebody now and I'm going to be a superstar. It's like, man, you got to be prepared for when Michael Jackson is staring you in the face. That track that you've set up and ready to go has got to be like has got to be ready to go, and you have to know how to get it to that point.
Look, that's another thing that I learned is the mix on the rough mix on the record is so important, and I learned this from Rodney Jerkins. Is like when I go into the session to play my tracks, I'm making them at home, and it's from the drum machine straight to the tape deck or whatever, CD burner or whatever, right? Not knowing that when I go into the A&R meeting, Rodney Jerkins has his engineer mixing his rough mix, so that thing sounds like the record.
Right.
So when he's playing your tracks, and they're just a straight direct from the drum machine to the cassette deck, it doesn't have the same feel as when Rodney is playing his, and he's got all kinds of EQ and effects and everything, and it sounds like the record. So when he turns his thing up in the meeting, his thing sounds like that shit is on the radio now, and your joint sounds like a demo. And then I was like, you're competing against all of these top producers that make records and have those records, the demo sounding like the record. Yeah. So if you can't make your music sound like that when you're going in and playing for the meeting, the A&R meeting, they're gonna win every single time because it already feels like it's a record. Yep. So when he's got it in and he's turning up and Rodney's bouncing his head and woo and just going like all animated.
He's selling it.
Yeah, he's definitely
he's selling it to the last minute.
And you're sitting there and yours doesn't sound like that, and you're like, I hope he at least lets 30 seconds go by before he goes to the next track, because mine doesn't sound like his. So at that point, I learned that you got to make that thing sound like the record. Mm-hmm. You can't come in there with a bunch of excuses. I always tell artists all the time, they come in there, well, it hasn't been mixed and it's just rough and all that. I was like, you got to be confident enough that what I'm about to play you're going to get it and it sounds like the record versus, well, it's not mixed yet.
Oh,
right?
dude.
You can't say any of that. You got to be like, I'm confident that what I'm going to play you is going to blow you away.
I always tell them, I'm like, your music cannot come with a disclaimer.
Yeah.
It cannot come with a disclaimer.
Yeah.
If it's got a disclaimer, you need to finish it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's not done. Right. And so either don't bring it in to record it or don't play it for me.
Right.
Because I don't want to hear it.
Right. That's the comment you say after you play it. Oh, you like that? That's just a rough mix. Right. You know what I'm saying? You got to come with that afterwards.
All right. I think I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that afterwards.
Yes. You got to come with that afterwards.
All right. So after all this crazy superstar talk of yours, let's talk about the Billy Lennox record.
Yes.
And what you're doing and when it's coming out and if it's coming out and
yes.
and what's been cracking so far with it.
Okay. So I've always been behind the scenes as a producer, but I've always had an itch to be an artist. And like so many times, I would always play the background as the visionary behind it. And I would be working with all these artists. I would put so much time and money into these artists, developing these artists. And we would go and get to the point where we get the record deal, and then the artist burns and crashes, right? And they can't navigate through the ups and downs, right, when it's happening, right? So I just realized, I was like, you can't want the deal and success to happen more than the artist does, because the artist has to actually go out there and do it. So when that happened a couple of times, I realized, I was like, well, you're giving them all the information, you're developing the artist, you're making all the music, you're writing the songs. Why aren't you the artist?
Right.
And because I know what I can do. I know I can endure the bumps and the bruises, the ups and downs in the music business. I don't know if this person that I'm investing all my time and money into can do that. So at that point, I was just like, let me really focus on being the artist now. I'm out of that stage of trying to be the producer for some artist and trying to live through his dreams. I was like, let me focus on my own thing. And I had all the connections to the executives. I make all the music. I know what I want to do. I'm bold enough to try to do something that is different than what is already out there and stand behind it. Because when you do something to the left or something that's different than what's in the industry already, it's going to take a second for people to get it. But when everybody does get it, everybody gets it. Like I always say, nobody's going to get it until everybody gets it. So
that's true.
So I was like, I want to make this record that it encompasses everything that is me, everything that I grew up on, everything that I'm into. I went to Greensboro Day School listening to pop music, listening to Wings and Neil Sedaka and all these different pop artists growing up, but then I'm coming home and listening to black radio and hearing all these soul artists. So I'm like, that's in me. When I was producing, I was always sampling classic rock records versus, and then jazz and things like that. So I was like, let me make this record that encompasses all that. And all my heroes were doing those type of records where they were like a fusion of a lot of different things. Every icon that you know on the planet has done a fusion of something to create something new.
Right.
So when you look at the Police and you look at Jimi Hendrix and all these different artists, they were doing a fusion. So I was like, let me do that. And so I started writing this Billy Lennox project, and I started writing records. I started singing. I learned how to sing. I just found my own sound and direction, and you can't do that unless you have your own equipment and you're at home and you're in there where nobody is around. You have no inhibitions,
right.
And you're just writing and trying things that may or may not work. But I would say it's recording. If it doesn't work, you erase it. But you have to try it, and you have to find yourself.
That's a good philosophy. I never really thought about it that way.
You have to find yourself as an artist, because if you don't know who you are, they're going to try to tell you who you are, and most of the times they are wrong.
Yep.
So you got to really zoom in, hone in, and know who I am, what my perspective is, what my music sounds like. You have to do enough of your music so you have a direction and a sound so that they can identify, like, this is his sound, this is the type of stuff that he talks about, this is him as an artist. And so for the last 2 years, I've just really been developing myself so that I'm very sure of what all of those things are. So when I present to the label, there's no question when they're asking me, different about the project. I know exactly what it is, where it's going to fit in the marketplace, and who I am. And so 17 songs. The pandemic was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it's like you're not paying bills, you're not out there chasing
crazy
checks.
Right?
Yes, you're in your room from the time you wake up until the time you go to sleep, writing and recording every single day.
Dude, for the studio business and studio cats and people that do that, it was like, it's kind of weird because I kind of feel guilty at a certain point. But at a certain point, I'm like, shit, man, I don't feel guilty. Like, I was just afforded the time to be. And really, I worked more in 2020, not necessarily with other people, but just in here constantly, because nobody was on the road.
Right. And that was my whole thing, is just like finding myself and having the space, because I always seek creative freedom. And to seek creative freedom, you have to have the finances that you're not waking up worrying about paying any bills. You're just making music every single day. And when you clear that noise out, you can really focus, and you can get into a spot of repetition where you're making music every single day.
Right.
And anytime repetition comes in the room, you're going to make your best music, and because you're in that space. And so my thing was, like, I did like 14 songs during the pandemic. Wrote and produced 14 songs and put out 2 singles and 2 videos and things like that. So it really gave me a chance to really Billy Lennox would have never happened had it not been for the pandemic, to really find myself as an artist. And so now the record is done.
Are all the songs out yet?
No. I've only put out 2 singles and 2 videos. Scars was the first single. The second single was Electric Sex. You can find them on Spotify and on YouTube. The videos are on there as well. And so once I finished that, now I have offers on the table right now. So now I'm about to go to New York and LA and begin the shopping process of finding the right home. Not just sign any deal, but find the right home for the project with somebody that really gets it and can see what it's supposed to be and help me execute it. So that has been the thing. And just also, too, understanding the importance of content and being able to post content and getting people engaged, because that's how I got executives interested in my music, is that I was posting, the journey of me making the music and posting the music every day. And so when people get on and they see you're doing this on a regular basis, they become engaged to the point that they're coming back every day to see what else you're doing with the project every day. So that was something I had to learn, to just be more open to posting content and letting people in on the music.
It's a thing, man. Because it's because the old school was hold it all in. We're going to release it all at one time. We're going to release a single and then release it all at one time.
And I still struggle with that.
Don't tell anybody about anything.
Right. I still struggle with that.
It's weird, man.
We're not in that place anymore where it's like they'll make a music song tonight and tomorrow morning it's on there.
Dude,
it's for everywhere.
Yes,
for people to get
everywhere.
It,
so for the people who on the final YouTube version of this can't see the cool necklace with the artist name on it, Billie, Lennox for my listeners.
Yes.
To check that out via just, Google search that.
Yes.
It's on Spotify.
Billy Lennox, I created the name because I really got into the experimental period of the Beatles and really just studied that whole period. And I remember Paul McCartney faked his death. They had a guy named Billy Shears or whatever that was pretending to be Paul McCartney, and it was like a big promotional stunt that they did. So that's where the Billy came from, because I really admired that period of the Beatles and their experimentation. And Lennox is Lennox Ave in New York City, Malcolm X. So, I put those two things together, and that's the gist of who Billy Lennox is. He's about experimentation and being creative, but also he's got a perspective and a message that will help people. And that's the biggest thing about music. What I learned through this thing is that, like, music is so powerful. It touches so many people. You cannot take that for granted and waste that moment that everybody is listening to your song without saying something that will heal people, that will help people get through a tough situation. Because from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, we're always consuming music. So when you have their attention, you're the messenger. You're the guy that is going to help people get through whatever it is they're getting through in that moment. So you have to take advantage of that and just understand that, like, God sent us here. He sent me here to do that.
Right.
He sent me, all this music is coming through me, and I'm the vessel.
Yeah, we're just a conduit, man, and we have to stop at a certain point. And like you said, you have to get over all the things that are put in your way as a hurdle, and you just have to go like, all right, whatever's coming through me is supposed to come through me.
Definitely.
Whatever's coming through you is supposed to come through you.
And I don't make music like, I know now a lot of artists go in the studio trying to make that hit record constantly, so they do the same thing over. They keep making another version of the same record over and over again because they're trying to get a hit single. But for me, I grew up in a time where the album was a full statement. So I took you through so many different moods and expressions throughout the whole album. So it's viewed as a whole piece of material versus a song.
Right.
I don't want you to buy into a song. I want you to buy into Billy Lennox to the point where you know everything about me after you listen to this album, and you're interested in my perspective versus a song, Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, man, I think we're about at, we're over an hour. We're about an hour 20 right now. Look at that. People getting their money's worth for their free podcast. So I want to thank you. I can't thank you enough for coming in here and doing this, man.
Yeah, man.
And again, my friend Fanatic, Billy Lennox. Look for everything, everywhere that you can. Yeah. If you want to go back and look up any of those videos about the stuff that we were talking about with the Beyonce at the Grammys, with any of this stuff, it's all out there. Yeah. Just search it out, and it's really cool. And I'm just honored to call this guy a friend. Again, Fanatic, the producer, and thank you for tuning in to Conversations in Groove.
Make sure you follow me on Instagram.
Oh yeah, what's your IG?
Fanatic, aka Billy Lennox. You can follow me on Instagram and follow my journey as we put this music out. It's going to be a big year for us.
You guys be good. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
See? What did I tell you? Told you it was going to be a cool episode, right? Cool and super, super groovy. You know why? Because this is Conversations in Groove. Check it out on our Earthtones official YouTube channel and on all of your podcast apps. I'm Benji Johnson. I am your host, and I will be your host every week for Conversations in Groove live right here from Earthtones Recording Studio.